Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros MLB. This is the Fantasy Baseball Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia. With me today, Joe Orrico and the Welsh. And we're going to have some fun because everybody talks about sleepers all the time. And sometimes it gets a little dull. Not that the players are dull, but it's the same names. We need to shake it up a little bit. So today, we're going to give you 20 sleepers in 3 words or less. We will expand a little bit on some of the reasoning behind these 3 words, yes, but we're going to do a little rapid fire, have a little fun, talk about some guys that are going later in drafts that could have that sleeper potential. We all love that, right? Guys are going to outperform their ADP. Not all these guys are going to hit. History teaches us that. However, there might be a few gems here, and the boys are going to help dig us out there and give us some of those rare finds that we're going to be very grateful that we had in 2025 in our fantasy baseball drafts. And speaking of drafts, don't forget, it's that time again. The draft simulator is open for business. Level up your fantasy baseball draft prep with Fantasy Pros Mock Draft Simulator. Complete realistic mock drafts in minutes without waiting between picks. Tailor your mock draft strategies to your league specific settings, including roster configurations and scoring systems, and you can receive instant feedback and draft grades to refine your strategy and gain a competitive edge. You've seen us use it on the show a million times. You should be using it as well. Prepare confidently and dominate with your drafts for the upcoming 2025 season using the mock draft simulator only at fantasypros.com/mock. That's right. Or you could download Draft Wizard for MLB as well. So, gentlemen, it's great to see you as always. I want to kick things off here in the infield, and then we'll kind of push around to some outfielders, and then eventually we'll get to some pitchers as well. Let's start with a catcher that I find myself drafting a lot because he's there late. Ivan Herrera is going to be the everyday guy. He is going to be the man behind the plate now for the St. Louis Cardinals, now that Contreras is moving to first base. And I want to start with this one, Joe, because for me, I'm looking at a guy that has already shown you a little bit with the stick, which is good. We know defensively it's where the Cardinals want to live. So give me Ivan Herrera in 3 words for 2025.
First off, great to see you guys. Great to see both of you here. My 3 words for Ivan Herrera, it's kind of cheating here for the first one. It's 2 words, 3 words or less. So I'm going less here. Everyday role. It's the everyday role. And catchers, we know they're not playing 162, but we have a lot of vacated targets, to use the football word there, with Wilson Contreras moving to first. So Ivan Herrera is probably going to be in like the 120-ish game range, which is really solid, especially considering what he brings to the table. You're getting a guy who can hit close to 300. In fact, he hit 301 last year. With the expected batting average of 293 from a catcher, you don't really see that. He also stole 5 bases in 72 games, so you're chipping in some power, some speed, decent batting average. The lineup is not amazing, but considering he's going to be playing every single day as a late catcher, especially in those 2 catcher formats, you don't have to push him up draft boards at all. I really like Ivan Herrera this year.
All right, 1 down, 19 to go. Let's go to Michael Toglia of the Colorado Rockies. Now, Welsh, it's been rough for the Rockies out there in Colorado for quite some time, but perhaps some help is on the way. We saw Brenton Doyle have a good season last year. Maybe some more of these young prospects might start to pop off a little bit. First base looks like a good opportunity for him in this ballpark. We always get very excited about the hitters in Colorado. So describe Michael Toglia to me in 3 words or less for 2025.
Yeah, the Rockies have been a lot more couple lettered things, 4 letters in the Rockies organization lately. And 3 words for that team has been not very good. But Toglia, my 3 words I'm going to use are Rocky Mountain High. Rocky Mountain High for Michael Toglia, who is a big power monster, dropped 25 homers last year in literally like 399 at-bats. I was going to say under 400 at-bats. He also stole some bases, but he stunk with the batting average. But he is a very, very popular late draft target. That's why the sleeper designation is perfect for him. He has to improve his batting average, but his expected batting average was like 20 plus points higher than last year. So 244. So here's what I tell you. One of the highest barrel percentages in baseball last season, 17%. That is elite of elite. Over 50% hard hit rate. You put that barrel and that hard hit rate together, we're talking 92 average exit velocity. These are all things, once again, that are just supporting he's a mashing hitter. So he hit 218 last year. If he's going to hit 244 on the expected side into 250, it's a guarantee he's going to hit 35 homers. He's got to drop the strikeout rate down for sure. But in a world where, we are needing to pay for more power payment really should come at the top of drafts. It's hard to find like elite power later in drafts. all of a sudden there is a guy that has legitimate 40 home run power, a Santander-ish like player in Michael Toglia. So my 3 words for this sleeper are Rocky Mountain High.
Interesting comparison there. Santander is going to be 26 this year, 147 strikeouts in 116 games. That's too much. And look,
also a switch hitter, I'd point out, like Santander.
Yeah, look, and in the minor leagues, 247. So it's not like all of a sudden he's going to change his stripes and become a big high average hitter at some point. He is going to be a slugger in that true sense, and that's what's going on there. But
yeah,
a cut in the strikeouts will certainly go a long way to help him in 2025 reach that level, because you want to make productive outs. If you're going to make outs, at least put the ball in play a little bit more, give yourself some more fantasy value, right? It's hard to get fantasy points if you can't get on base. Homers are fun, but you need a little bit more. Let's do another first baseman here. Let's talk about Tyler Soderstrom of the Athletics. It's going to take me all year to make sure I'm saying the Athletics now, and I can't say Oakland now. It's, I've been through a lot. I've been through the San Diego Chargers. I've been through the Commanders debacle for many years. And it's just like every year, there's always one of them. The Guardians, I finally figured that out. But here we go, the Athletics. I'm just calling them the Athletics now. This is what I've got to do. Let's go back to you, Joe. So Soderstrom, another guy that's a very buzzy player in 2025. Describe him in 3 words or less.
Elite power potential. And honestly, I'm probably still going to end up calling them the Oakland Athletics. I'm going to say put the over at 18.5 for the season or something like that. I'll probably hammer the over.
We should do a jar on leading off this year. We should have like a money jar every time we say Oakland.
Yes. Like Schmidt used to have in New Girl. That
and then we'll just
things in that show.
And then we'll turn it over to betting pros, and we'll just make some type of like final game season bet with the Athletics if we do it. So just be on the lookout for the money jar Oakland Athletics bets we'll be doing.
We gotta file that one away because that's a good one.
Yeah.
But Tyler Soderstrom, what he did last season, just 61 games, he hit 9 home runs. And if you look at the under the surface metrics, a 14.5% barrel rate, 48.9 on the hard hit. And you also got the massive park upgrade. I know that there's been a lot of talk about how good the park actually is and if it's one of the better PCL parks. They were playing in the Coliseum. It's like as bad as it could possibly be before. So it is definitely an upgrade. You're also seeing a lot of the players around Soderstrom in that lineup really starting to improve. Brent Rooker had a massive season. Lawrence Butler was fantastic. Shea Langoliers. There's a lot to really like in Oakland. And I think Soderstrom in the middle of that lineup could easily give you 30 home runs. If you look at the various projection systems on Fangraphs, it's between 24 and 27. I think we can see 30 home runs, and his ADP is close to pick 300. If you are getting him as a corner infield spot or even somebody on your bench, I think the upside is really, really high there for Tyler Soderstrom.
Yeah, the 2024 PCL numbers are really good for him too. 279, 385, 607, 991 OPS, but again, it's PCL, 33 games. But if you look at the 300 plus games that he played in the minor leagues in his career so far, 272, 339, 532 / with an 871 OPS. Those are pretty solid numbers right there from Soderstrom. And I'm glad you brought up the ballpark factor too, because I think that's another thing people really gonna have to reprogram their brains about for the Rays this year, for the Athletics. Almost said A's, but I didn't. The Athletics this year. We don't have the jar yet even.
We don't even know the money.
But I am excited too, Joe. I'm glad you brought up like Rooker and Butler and those guys too, because if Brent Rooker can hit 40 home runs in that ballpark, I know, like, I don't want to get too crazy about things, but it at least makes me feel really good about a possible repeat of that.
And the ballpark factor, just to throw out there, I believe it is 5 feet less in left field. So for right-handed hitters, you're going to get an extra 5 feet. It goes from 330 to 325 or 335 to 330. It's a couple feet less in center field, and it's the exact same dimension on the right-handed side. So you've got a little bit of an extra cushion in that ballpark. Plus, you've got the Sacramento. You're getting away from coastal. It's hotter in Sacramento, a little bit closer to like what I have here in Arizona. So yeah, if those guys were already doing it there, I completely agree with you guys here.
You know what's funny too? Somebody just brought this up to me the other day. They're like, baseball is the only sport where the playing field is different in every single place. And it made me think for a second. Every football field's 100 yards. Every basketball court's the same dimensions.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
It's only baseball where you go from park to park and everything is completely different. Like everything's 90 feet. But once you get outside that infield, it's like somebody got hammered. It was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. Everything's going to be 90 feet, a perfect diamond until we get to that outfield. Then what do we do? Whatever you want. You want to have a hill in center field? Do it. You want to have a 40-foot wall in Boston?
I miss
Go ahead, do it. I mean, but think about how ridiculous that is compared to every other sport we know. It's the only one I can
big
think
green
of.
wall in left field that's going to go 50 feet high.
Green wall. Why not? Sure. All right, let's get to another player, Luis Rengifo of the Los Angeles Angels. Now, I feel like the Angels are kind of ripe for sleepers, Welsh, because I think people are looking down the organization. It's a downturn in the organization, especially since Ohtani left. So describe this player in 3 words or less.
Luis Rengifo, Swiss Army knife. That comes from also his multi-position eligibility. Like they're willing to move him around. He's going to have multiple spots on that, but also he as a player has kind of retransformed his game. This is a guy that had a couple seasons in, you were like 15 plus homers every single year, a little bit on the stolen bases, average was, fine. And then all of a sudden this past year, what did he do? He became a different type of hitter. He gets highest average. He's hitting over 300. All of a sudden he's not hitting for power and he's stealing record amount of bases for himself. 24 stolen bases to 6 homers. How he did it as well. He used to be one of those guys you could see he's like, all right, he's tapping into like high barrel rates. And all of a sudden he just says, no, screw it. I'm going to hit more across my body, more contact hitting. His barrel rate plummeted, but also so did his strikeouts because he was having a lot more zone coverage. So he's a Swiss Army knife in that we know there is a theoretical 20-ish home run upside. We now know that he can steal over 20 bases. He's going to qualify at multiple positions. He's kind of an afterthought for most people. And I agree with what you were saying. Something when you said about the Angels, I started to think about was, what's the Angel right now that is being overdrafted? And there isn't one. There isn't a single Angel I can think of outside of like, if you want to look at NFBC, people taking a guy like Ben Joyce. Like
I was going to say Ben Joyce. That was the only, I was going to say maybe, but I don't even think from early mocks and things I've done that I've seen him be over. I mean, we just did a mock a couple weeks ago and I double tapped closer and he was one of the guys that was still
Trout's outside the top 100.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about another, probably one of the more talented fantasy players a little bit later, but yeah, so I kind of agree with like the overall sentiment. Luis Rengifo though is the Swiss Army knife for fantasy and he's always a sleeper because his value has not popped up. He's just got to stay healthy.
All right, for value, I'm in on the Rays offense, the A's offense, and I'm also in on the Nats offense. I want to talk about Luis Garcia Jr. Last year, 24 years old, 282, had 18 homers, 22 stolen bases, and I feel like, Joe, nobody cares, and his ADP is still really friendly. So, describe Luis Garcia of the Nats in 3 words or less.
So it's a positional drop-off in terms of the second basemen that are being drafted this year. It's a terrible position. It's really, really awful. And there is some depth later on if you get down into the Brandon Lowe's of the world. And there are some deeper names. But if you are looking for somebody who is fairly secure at the position, you have like 7 options, 8 options, and then you're really starting to throw darts on like the Luis Arises of the world. But Luis Garcia was fantastic last season. And like you said, it's not really talked about that much. 18 and 22, 70 RBI. He had a 282 batting average. But I really think once you get to this point in the draft, if you don't have a second baseman, if you don't have Ketel Marte, Altuve, Albies, Marcus Semien, you get to Garcia, who's going around pick 120, and then there's not really another second baseman going for about 30, 40 picks after. That's generally Bryce Terang. That drop-off really, if you don't have somebody before Garcia, makes me hit him every single time in drafts. I just think that if you're looking at somebody at a weak position who can give you 20-20 with a good batting average, you're getting like 4+ categories, and that lineup is very good. They've made some additions in Nathaniel Lau and Josh Bell. You got another year older James Wood and Dylan Cruz. Like, there's a lot to like in that lineup, and Garcia should be somewhere in the middle of it. So I like him as a sleeper. But the more we get into draft season, like he's pushing up to close to top 100. So maybe he won't be a sleeper by the time we get to March because people are starting to pay more attention. But I really like Luis Garcia.
It's a simple calculus for me, Joe, which is Altuve at about 39 overall, right? 2020 guy, you hope, hitting 270 something. Well, that sounds a lot like Garcia 100 picks later.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just a no-brainer. I could rather just wait and take Garcia, even if I have to go around earlier to do it. Another guy, too, that certainly there's excitement around, at least for me, because he is in Houston now, is Isaac Paredes. Again, now the Houston Astros. Now, power hasn't always been his friend, Welsh, but when this move happened and he ended up going to Houston, there was that great study that came out of how many home runs he would have had he been playing in Houston all year. And that was very telling, which is, again, why I'm excited. You know, we're getting guys out of Tampa finally from an offensive standpoint. From the pitching standpoint, it's a little bit different here. But Paredes, I think people also forget that he's only 26 years old. And I know for me, I kind of also got hit with that in the face a little bit. I went, oh, yeah, that's right. He is relatively young. There's still a lot of potential here for him. So Paredes, for you, in 3 words or less for 2025.
Pull it. Pull
Just 2
it.
words.
I only need 2. Phrasing. It's the third word.
Phrasing.
Pull it, space,
Yeah.
phrasing. Just pull the ball.
I was
Isaac
gonna say,
Paredes.
how about pull the ball? Maybe that would have been better.
Oh, yeah, maybe. All right,
retrospect.
you know what? You're a little bit
better
more professional
choices.
here. But you know what? I think you guys will remember those 2 words for Isaac Paredes. Pull it, because that is where he thrives. You mentioned that home run number. I will give it to you. If you go over to Baseball Savant, you can look at their expected homers by ballpark. It's a little bit weird because it's just like if they played all their games at a ballpark. But it can also tell you where there is a theoretical home advantage. Well, the number 1 ballpark for Isaac Paredes, where he would have hit the most homers if he played every single game last year, was Houston. Of course, the Houston Astros, he would have hit more homers in that ballpark than any other place. Why is that? Because the pull side is where you can do stuff. And that's all that Isaac does. He's got low barrel rates, one of the worst hard hit out there. I mean, it's a 27% hard hit rate. That is bottom 6 percentile of the league. Average EVs, they stink. But what does he do? He gets the ball in the air, an over 22-degree launch angle. He has had that 2 straight years. The Cubs, that kind of dissipated. You can't really pull the ball like he was able to do in Tampa Bay. This is the greatest place you can do that. So he's got to continue to hit for average. He did hit 238 last year, which was a little bit lower than the year prior. His expected batting average kind of stunk. But again, the ballpark, it's going to open up a lot of opportunities. He is the most pull heavy of players. So I don't think everybody is kind of caught up to the value of Isaac being in this new environment. So yeah, I think there's a sleeperness to it just because this home environment is literally built for Isaac Paredes.
Next up, Jake Burger, now a Texas Ranger. Burger, a guy with some pop in the bat. Now he goes from a Marlins situation to a Ranger situation. Joe, I like this move. I think this is kind of one of the under radar ones. I remember when the poor manager of the Marlins came on after he was like, well, we got some great guys on the team too. I reached out to Jake Burger, and then I feel like 48 hours later he was traded. And I was like, well, see ya. So much for that. But Burger, if this lineup especially stays healthy, we're going to talk about a couple Rangers here coming up. Very intriguing option to me because he does have that power in the bat, and because there have been some injuries in some of these players over the last couple of years, there's also some opportunity for him as well to stay on the field and contribute to this lineup. So give me 3 words or less on the Burger.
Burgermeister Burger, to shout out that old Christmas cartoon. I forget which one it was now. I wonder if you guys remember what I'm talking about. Burgermeister Burger? No, nobody. Somebody out there listening is like,
is this in Canada? Is this what
this was the, what's it called? Not A Year Without a Santa Claus. It's like Santa Claus is Coming to Town. That's what it's called. It's called Santa Claus.
See, those Rankin and Bass ones creep me out.
Yeah.
Like all those weird
Stop time animation.
Yeah, the stop action that nightmare fuel. I don't know about you, Welsh, but nightmare fuel for me.
I was just thinking when we were talking about burgers in Canada, I was just thinking like Royale with cheese. That's all that I had. So sorry.
That's Montreal. But anyway,
the metric system. Now we can go down the Pulp Fiction rabbit hole, but let's go back to Jake Burger. So Jake Burger, dual eligible pop. You're getting first base and third base eligibility. And I know there's always questions about which site, who qualifies where, but he played enough last season at both positions. It was 69 appearances at first, 59 at third. So he has both of those positions. He is pretty much a guarantee to hit 30 home runs. If you can do it in Miami while missing 25 games, well, he had 29 home runs, so close enough. You can do that in Texas. He had 34 the year prior, especially with his power metrics, 12 to 15% barrel rate, 45 to 50% hard hit rate. And there's also that lineup, which is just unbelievable. It's so stacked that at this point, my colleagues at Fangraphs are projecting that he's going to bat 8th, but I think he's probably going to be a little bit higher than that. But Semien, Seager, Langford, Jock Peterson, Adolis Garcia, Josh Jung, Evan Carter. This is a stacked lineup where you could easily see Burger going for 35 home runs and 100 RBI with that dual eligibility at 2 terrible positions. First and third are both pretty weak, so there's not really anything I can say against Jake Burger. Yeah, you're not going to get stolen bases, but you're getting pretty much everything else. One last thing, though. We are pretty close to the Chris Davis. He's hit 250 in 3 consecutive seasons. Remember Chris Davis for the A's hit 247 4 years in a row? One more 250 season for Jake Burger, and he has taken that crown. The Burger crown, the Burger King.
I like that. I always liked Chris Davis,
Burger King.
Because Chris Davis, you always knew exactly what you were getting in that player. And season-long roto, I was fine with him. Good value, good power bat, and knew exactly who he was. Josh Jung, I don't know if we do know who he is. He's the next guy on our list. And he is a guy that's been a bit of a tease, right? At one point, he had a run where we thought, oh, maybe this guy's like a rookie of the year kind of guy. And then injuries happen, some inconsistencies happen. It's been kind of a rough go. He's going to be 27 this year. So, Welsh, Josh Jung in 3 words or less.
Yeah, and I think one thing before I give those words,
That's
it's
not. That's
important.
more. That's a lot of words.
I
3 words
apologize.
or
I
less.
apologize. Okay, more than 120 numerical.
There you go. Now you
numerical.
can.
So
talk
more than
like that.
120.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should have done that. I think there also can kind of be discussed in this is like we were picking and talking about these names, but like I didn't pick this one because this is not someone that I'm super into. But where can he tap into being a sleeper? So that's kind of the identification of this, is talking about these popular sleepers. Where can that happen? By playing more than 120 games. 122, I think, is what he had the previous year, because that's the thing. Right now, everything just continuously looks average. He had like just under 500 at-bats in 2023, 23 homers, 260 average. Like, it's solid. That's good. Is there massive upside in Josh Jung right now? No, the profile last year looked really bad. Expected batting average stunk. Expected slug, expected WOBA, not good. Doesn't hit the ball super hard. He does barrel a bit, but he was also dealing with this injury, this wrist injury that he's had. So he's had, this collection of like, it's okay seasons, not great metrics, but also injuries. But where the sleeper comes in is he's just like free. He's getting into the line of being free. Now, if I have a choice between Jake Burger and Josh Jung, it's Jake Burger 10 out of 10 times. But how Josh Jung taps into being a sleeper is going to be healthy, because that wrist injury clearly took off some of that batting profile from last season. Maybe we can get back to that previous batting profile, which still had some warts on it, but in 2023, he had a 47% hard hit rate and an almost 12% barrel rate. And if we get back to that, then he will be a big sleeper from this year. So more than 120 games, please.
And remember, these are just popular sleepers. They're not necessarily the ones we're saying are going to be great. These are the guys in the marketplace right now. I did a little cross section. I went all the way around. I was reading different articles, looking at different YouTube videos of who the kids are talking about, so we could talk about them and give you a heads up on whether or not you should be investing. So, Welsh, if you don't think he's worthy of the time, or you don't think he's going to play 120, you hammer away. But 3 words first. That's the lesson here. All right, Colt Keith, another second baseman here, Detroit Tigers. There's some flashes there with Colt Keith that I thought were really interesting. Another prospect here coming through the Tiger system, and the Tigers really showed a lot. Now, this is a guy in 239 minor league games, /300, 382, 512. That's a stud. That's a guy that could really become a very important player quickly. So, what you saw out of Colt Keith last year in 2024, 3 words or less. What are you going to see in 2025?
A well-rounded stud. That's what I think we are going to see out of Colt Keith. This guy really, I wouldn't say he hit the ground running. There were a couple of bumps and bruises in the early going. The first month or so was a bit rough for him, but 13 homers, 7 steals, hitting 260. That's pretty solid. You're not paying up really anything for him, and you also have to factor in the growth as a top prospect in an up-and-coming lineup where they have made alterations to the stadium over the last couple of years to make it slightly more hitter-friendly. A lot of things you like to see. But it's another case where the guys around him, you got Parker Meadows and Kerry Carpenter, who are both guys that I really like. Riley Green is an up-and-coming star. They just added Gleyber Torres. Matt Vierling is pretty underrated. I think it's a really solid top of the order, where Keith is probably going to be, I would imagine he's batting 5th there, so a lot of RBI opportunities, but he's very well-rounded in that he doesn't hurt you anywhere from a fantasy point of view. He's probably going to be in the 15, maybe to 20 home runs would be pushing it a little bit, but that's the upside. 20 homers, maybe you get 8 to 10 steals with a decent batting average. He was a 266 expected batting average last year, so I really am a sucker for guys who don't hurt you anywhere. And Colt Keith is not somebody where you're taking him and thinking, I'm going to have to sacrifice batting average. I get no speed. You get a little bit of everything in an up-and-coming lineup in a slightly improving ballpark. So give me Colt Keith every day.
All right, another guy on the Angels. Again, we're circling back to some of these lesser teams a little bit in terms of hype and buzz. Neto last year, 23 years old, hit 23 home runs, stole 30 bases, yet the ADP is still pretty suppressed. I understand he was under 250 at 249, but Zach Neto, a player, Welsh, you've talked about a lot on our shows over the years. So 2025 in 3 words or less for Neto.
Take my shoulder. You can have it. My shoulder's actually hurting a lot lately. I'm getting old, so maybe not mine.
Is that why you're trying to give it away?
Take Orrico's shoulder. Do whatever we can, because the only reason, well, there's 2, but the main reason that Zach Neto is suppressed right now is because he's hurt. He's got a shoulder injury, and they're saying he might not start the season. So your biggest narrative to the sleeper is just take the shoulder. Like, let's get that fixed, because you are projecting in some missed games. Projections, interestingly enough, though, are still in the marker of like 135, somewhere between 135 and 140 games. Now, Joe, you made a face. If that's optimistic, okay, and you're taking on risk. I would say that's the biggest concern as well. Anytime you draft a guy that's already injured, you're taking on some like inherent risk, but it is the injury that is suppressing him. I will say, when you look at the big numbers he put up, 23 homers, 30 stolen bases, this massively big season, the hitting profile isn't like ridiculously crazy impressive. It has shades of like when I would watch like CJ Abrams, where it's like, well, he doesn't have like high end barrel, doesn't hit the ball hard. He does get the ball in the air. He's kind of maximizing. He was really pull heavy, and that was something he was able to change this year. He upped his pull percentage, pulled the crap out of the ball, got some homers out, and he upped his zone contact percentage. As well, he just became a really good all-around hitter. He didn't struggle necessarily. You know how they have a guy that's like, I'm only a fastball hitter. No, like he hit well. The top 3 pitch types, which accounted for over 60% of what he saw, he hit essentially 260 or higher. So he's making solid contact. He's got pull pop. He steals bases, and he is massively suppressed because of potential time missed. But if he does play 135, 140 games, guess what? People are paying higher prices for prospects right now. And Zach Neto, we've seen do a 20-30 season. So Zach Neto is a fantastic sleeper that is suppressed because of that shoulder. So offer up your shoulder so we can get Zach Neto back.
Well, it's just funny, Welsh, because right now in the ADP consensus I'm looking on FantasyPros, he is still being drafted ahead of Bryson Stott and Dansby Swanson, which, considering all that, I mean, I understand the story.
Well, the counting stats are going to be higher, though. He's
I
a
think
bigger
in
counting
season-long
stats
roto,
guy.
I think you're still willing to make that risk investment possible.
And you want to know what's cool about that? What you just said?
What's cool?
You could take Neto and one of those players, and you can play one of them in the first month of the season and then get bigger upside on Neto later.
All right, maybe a little post-hype sleeper here, Anthony Volpe of the New York Yankees. And look, I'm somebody who's seen Volpe play in person numerous times when he was in Somerset. Terrific young player. Certainly has had his ups and downs, struggled with the batting average a little bit. I think the guy's got power. He reminds me of, statistically speaking, someday like a Dustin Pedroia type player. I think that's what he's going to look like, statistically speaking, not necessarily visually. So, Joe, we've seen him in the major leagues now for a couple years. 2025, hopefully put some of the, maybe the bad habits behind him, or maybe can build on some confidence and some moments from last year. What are your expectations for him in 3 words or less?
Yankees leadoff hitter. That's kind of what I think I and a lot of people who are drafting, not that I'm like heavily invested. I've taken him a couple times, but it's been with the hope that he will get back to the top of the order, because that's where he was to start last season. Roughly in June or July, they dropped him down and he didn't get back up to the top of the order. So you kind of need him to be at the top of the order. If he's hitting 8th or 9th, that's going to be a bit of a concern. But if he is leading off, and then you got Jazz Chisholm, you got Aaron Judge, you got Cody Bellinger, Paul Goldschmidt, Giancarlo Stanton. There's a 100-run potential there quite easily. And then you're also looking at 25 steals, probably 15 or so homers. He sacrificed some of the power last year for batting average. In his rookie year, it was 21 homers. He batted 209. This past season, 12 homers, but he batted 243. And I think that's kind of a worthy trade-off. You'll take a few fewer home runs and get a little bit of a boost there in the batting average department. So as long as he's leading off in New York, which is not guaranteed, it's what Fangraphs is projecting right now, it's what I'm hoping for, then he is probably going to be worth this tag. And then maybe you can luck into a 20-30 season where he scores 100 runs for you.
Well, he's got to improve the OBP then, because 283, 293, 2 years in a row, that's not cutting it. It's weird because in the minors, 376 over 275 games. So it's not like a very tiny sample. It's a couple of seasons there. So Volpe, certainly, I'm not counting him out, but this does feel like a fork in the road moment here where he either needs to figure out that part of his game, and if not, he is going to be a guy hitting at the bottom of the order, and that's going to crush his fantasy value. Next on our list, a guy who showed a lot more fantasy value than I think any of us anticipated in 2025. Victor Robles, a guy that's been around forever with the Washington Nationals. Eventually, they finally said enough is enough. They sent him to Seattle. And then he stole 30 bases in 77 games, Welsh, and he also hit 328. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around all this still and process this. But Victor Robles in 2025 in 3 words or less.
Need other stuff. Stolen bases are there. We know that. It's going to be crazy projections. From July on with the Seattle Mariners, dude stole 29 bases. He stole 13 bases to finish out the year from September on. Like, he was running like crazy. Shout out to Derek Van Riper, who's got to be very excited about Victor Robles coming back through. I remember watching Robles in the AFL as a national, and it looked like he could have all the pieces, power, speed, 5-tool. He doesn't, and he hasn't, and he still really isn't in that spot. Stolen bases you could find cheaper, and that's been the cool thing, and that's kind of a narrative. People like, hey, don't take Ellie in the beginning because you can find stolen bases, and Victor Robles is a prime example. Projections are putting him around 40, and I see it. In half of a year, the dude practically stole 30 with the Mariners. So if they let him be aggressive, and he gets to hit near the top of the order, and he's running, that's great. Now, if that offense is popping, which they've added nobody, unless Miles Mastrobuoni, whatever, gets you excited. They've added
I'm just
nobody.
glad your 3 words for him were it wasn't pull it.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
I'll be here all week, everybody. You're welcome.
Robles just doesn't do anything else. You could expect higher run totals if he's hitting at the top of the lineup and he's with this team all year. The power hasn't quite been there. He's in the most suppressed ballpark that you could possibly have in Seattle for power suppression. RBIs are not there. So now you've already kind of knocked off 2 categories. If he, that's RBIs. If he does score a lot of runs, that gets you up there. He did hit 307. So you're tinkering between a 3 category to 3.5 category player, but he is a sleeper late. So right now, 40 plus stolen bases, that's great. But is he like Gerard Dyson from a couple years ago? If he does a little bit more, then he's going to be a massive sleeper. And if he were to hit 15 homers or something like that with that profile right now, then you're talking about a league winning type of guy. So Victor Robles, we just need other stuff.
Just need other stuff. All right, fair enough. Parker Meadows of the Detroit Tigers, another player last year that played 82 games, half a season for the Tigers. Hit just 244, but he did flash a little bit of power, 9 home runs and 9 stolen bases there for him last year. So Joe, Parker Meadows, 2025, 3 words.
2020 potential. You might be able to get a 2020 bat. And I already mentioned how much I like the Tigers lineup earlier. You might be able to get a guy around pick 200, maybe after, depending on your league and the specifications, but around pick 200, generally speaking, who can give you 2020, who can probably give you in the 70 to 75 homers and RBI range. The batting average isn't going to be fantastic. It's probably going to be just all right. But I think Meadows is probably going to lead off in Detroit, should lead to a lot of runs. You're probably looking at a 3.5 to 4 category guy, and you can get him as your 4th outfielder, 5th outfielder, maybe even as a bench bat. And I think there's a good chance that he really pays off at that ADP. It feels a little bit too low. There's a few Tigers, Kerry Carpenter as well, not on this list, but it just feels like maybe it's because they're the Tigers and they haven't been such a juggernaut over the last couple of years that people aren't really valuing them the way they should be. But Parker Meadows is somebody that could really break out, even potentially over a whole season, 25-25. It wouldn't really shock me.
All right, let's move on to the pitchers. Before we do, just a reminder, use the draft assistant over FantasyPros to make the best decisions during your fantasy draft. It connects directly to your draft and provides you with real-time pick suggestions, estimations on which players might get taken before your next pick, if you can wait for a player to the next round. It's really an incredible tool. The draft assistant fully integrates your customized cheat sheets and suggests picks based on your rankings, your team build, ADP, and other factors as well. And you can experience the smarter way to draft at fantasypros.com/assistant. Do not draft without it. All right, let's go back to you, Welsh, and let's talk about a pitcher here. Seattle Mariners pitcher Bryan Woo, who I say, if he stays healthy, could be right in the mix with some of the other guys in this rotation. I really feel that strongly about Bryan Woo. It is just a matter of health at this point, and I think he showed you some of those flashes already last year. So Bryan Woo in 2025.
The Nature Boy. Woo! The Nature Boy, Bryan Woo. Also, another version of this would be No Splitter Mafia. If you remember, I talked to Bryan Woo last year, and Bryan Woo told me, I was like, hey, are you going to join that Splitter Mafia? And he said, I'm not. Or I said, are you going to add a splitter? Because all the other Mariners were. And he told me, he's like, I'm not joining the Splitter Mafia. The interesting note to that as well is I would actually love to see him add a splitter, because Bryan Woo's season was ridiculous. Sub-3 ERA, expected ERA was in the sub-3 territory. He had one of the lowest walk rates in all of baseball at 2.8, which was ridiculous. Really low contact. Batting average against was low barrel, it was like 35% hard hit rate. Like, everything looked fantastic, but it was low strikeouts, 21%. So the funny thing about that is, in the No Splitter Mafia range, from a movement induced break, if you look at induced break charts and stuff, you can see that his bigger strikeout pitches of his slider and sweeper, they're moving across. A splitter would give a different eye vantage point to his fastball because the other two that he throws there are a changeup and sinker. Both of those super low K rates. So Bryan Woo, he already has created a floor for himself. He's kind of a CVS version of George Kirby at this point. The next move would be adding strikeouts to make the big potential rise up. So he has a chance to be a limousine riding, jet flying son of a gun in that rotation if he could add some extra strikeout potential, maybe a splitter in there. But the nature boy, Bryan Woo, is definitely a sleeper and should be on many teams.
Today's his birthday. Today's his birthday.
Happy birthday, Bryan Woo.
Happy birthday.
I'm sure he's enjoying the show. All right, let's talk about Matthew Boyd, who now finds himself on the Chicago Cubs. Now, Boyd, another guy, been around a long time. Everyone's been waiting. Sometimes lefties take a little bit longer in the pressure cooker to figure things out. But I think there came a certain point where everyone just kind of gave up and threw their hands up when it came to Boyd, a guy who's got a career ERA approaching 5. However, last year there was a tease of an 8-game sample with the Cleveland Guardians, 39 innings, 2.72 ERA, a 1.13 whip, where people got really excited. And now the Cubs are a team that's on the rise. So, Joe, Matthew Boyd, 3 words or less.
Best shape ever. And we're starting to get into that best shape of their lifetime when you start seeing clips. And it's maybe not exactly 100% accurate. He's probably not in the best shape of his life as he's pushing age 34. But we saw the best version of Matthew Boyd that we've ever seen last year. Lots of time in Detroit where they looked like there was potential, but he never really panned out. And then last season, we get this 28% strikeout rate, keeping the walks in check, 7.8%, and he gives you a 2.72 ERA. The supporting metrics are very solid as well. 365 Sierra, really solid if you're getting that, especially because nobody's really that interested in him. I think people had some interest in Cleveland, but in the drafts I've done since he's gone to Chicago, it just feels like he's being drafted as an SP8 or an SP9, just as some bench depth. So I really, really like Matthew Boyd as just kind of, especially in those deeper formats, because if it's like a 10-team league, you're maybe not getting this far. In those draft and holds or any NFBC type of leagues, Matthew Boyd is somebody that you should be really interested in.
The guy I'm really interested in, DJ Hertz of the Washington Nationals. Again, I keep coming back to the Nats. I'm going to have a lot of Nats on a lot of my teams because the value's good, the upside's huge. And Hertz, a lefty who has got a strikeout rate of almost 11 K per 9. Like, that's the kind of guy that I want. Got to worry about the walks just a little bit, but still, Welsh, this feels like a guy, maybe wins will be tough in that division. I get it. It's a very competitive division with the Phillies and the Mets and the Braves and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, Hertz to me looks like a guy that is being grossly underdrafted. You look at the FIP being at 3.71, lower than the 4.16 ERA. 3 words or less on DJ.
Not just football. That doesn't mean a lot to you guys. To us, that's funny because DJ Herz is a very known fantasy football player. He loves fantasy football. We've chatted, all of us have chatted with him. He's a great dude. I actually watched him. Friend of the show.
Good dude.
Saw him when he was with the Cubs. I watched him in the Arizona Fall League. I've actually told some funny stories about DJ. He would always wear his teammates' jerseys during workouts, and he would just sweat through their jerseys, and then he would put his on.
He's a funny guy. Like I asked him, I was like, I'm writing your profile in the Black Book. I was texting him back and forth, and he goes, I said, anything in particular you want me to add? He goes, no, man, just write the truth or whatever. He says, I was like, man, let's go.
He's a super interesting dude. So, but the fun of it is just saying not just football, because he loves fantasy football, but he's also a great pitcher. And as you mentioned, the strikeouts are the king here. One of the bigger positives is that ERA to expected ERA potential here. He had a 4.16 ERA, which is not like the best, but a 3.26 expected ERA. That kind of derives from 8% barrel rate, which is not great, but that has a potential to lower, but also just barely over 200 batting average, expected batting average pitched against. And that's paired with a almost 28% strikeout rate, which is definitely on the high side. So, he's essentially a 3-pitch pitcher. They all had 26% higher whiff rate. So that slider changeup, he's got just tons and tons of strikeout potential. And I would note this, that the Nationals have done a decent job of what they've been able to do with a guy like Mackenzie Gore, who went through just so many ups and downs of trying to develop and become, this branded pitcher who we thought he never was that when he was a Padre from who he was drafted. And they did some stuff to really get him to hone in. I think they can do the same thing with DJ Herz, who, as you mentioned, he just needs to probably lower some of those barrels, walk a little bit less. That strikeout rate and some of the expected ERA numbers give you a lot of optimism with a couple good strikeout pitches. So DJ Herz, a very good pick at the end of your draft, and someone you can chat with if you want to do some best ball football drafts later in the year.
All right, Shane Baz, another guy that's been on people's radars for a very long time. He turns 26 this year. Last year, 14 starts, a 3.18 ERA. But the strikeout rate was a little lower than normal. Usually he was in that double-digit K/9 range. He was closer to 8 last year. So Shane Baz, Joe Orrico, in 3 words or less.
He's finally healthy. This is what we've been waiting for. He had the Tommy John surgery. It's been a long road, a very long road for Shane Baz. I mean, we've been talking about him for 5 years now, something like that, 5-6 years, and he's made 23 career starts. So it's been a long road to get here. But last season, it finally seemed like once he came back, took a couple of starts because there was a couple of kind of rougher ones. But then he finished out the year 5, 6, 7 innings every single time, 1 or 2 earned runs, and the numbers were very solid. The strikeouts didn't quite get up to where I want them to be. 21% strikeout rate, not what you wanted of Shane Baz, but he's still working his way back. And the fact that he was able to give you a 3.06 ERA, the supporting ERA metrics are a little bit worse than that, like in the mid 3s range. But considering he's still working his way back and just getting his feet wet again for the first time in a couple years, he was pretty impressive. The ballpark and the division are not going to be that great. You have to worry a little bit there, but you don't have to really pay that much for Shane Baz this year. He's going around pick 170, 180 in a lot of rooms as your SP 5 or 6. And we know that the talent is there for him to be a true ace. Like, it's not even hyperbole to say that a couple of years ago, people were talking about him as an ex-superstar pitcher. He could get back there this year, and I think the price is right for you to jump back in this season.
David Festa, a guy that we talked about a lot last year on the show and leading off, Welsh, the first 2 starts were not good. He had a 10.8 ERA, but after that, over the next 11 starts that he made, a 3.81 ERA, a 1.25 whip, much more improved. But the funny thing is, those first 2 starts were so bad, they kind of tainted the numbers for Festa. So Festa in 2025, 3 words.
Find rotation spot. Maybe not a great complete sentence, but he's got to find a rotation spot at the rotation spot. It's like a robot. It's like find rotation spot is what he needs, because he currently does not have a rotation spot in Minnesota. They've got Chris Paddock in there, and they got Simeon Woods Richardson, both kind of locked. The other guys, Joe Ryan, Pablo Ober, those guys are locked in. So there's 2 other rotation spots that he does not currently have lined up. Now, very obtainable. He could win that against Simeon Wood Richardson, who has pitched in relief, and they could put him there. And that's also why, and it dictates, you see early NFBC ADPs around like 300. Like, it's a guy without a rotation spot who is still being drafted in or right around that 300 range. And there's actually a lot of similarities in what we talked about with DJ Herz. 8% barrel rate given up, almost 28% strikeout rate, 8% walk rate, and almost a run differential between his ERA and his expected ERA. Though his ERA was 4.9, his expected was still over 4. He's also a 3-pitch pitcher of slider, changeup, fastball. The uniqueness of him, though, is that those 3 pitches all had a 24 higher K percentage against. And having a fastball that induces those type of strikeouts, that makes that 3-pitch arsenal really scary. I think it's kind of like shades of, and they may be, building him out of this mold of like the Joe Ryan mold, like David Festa isn't necessarily like a big blow it crazy bayou type of guy, like 94.5 on the fastball velocity, 86 mile an hour slider, which is high, but this isn't like he's throwing 98 or anything like that. So I think they may truly see he is the mold of a Joe Ryan in the near future. There's a lot of good strikeout potential, but he has to secure a rotation spot.
Another guy fighting for a rotation spot is Clarke Schmidt of the New York Yankees. I think he's going to get it, especially if he's competing with the likes of guys like Marcus Stroman. 2.85 ERA last year, 16 starts, 85 innings pitched. He had 9.8 K/9. The whip was at 3.58. The FIP was at 3.58. The whip was at 1.18. And I'm looking at Schmidt as a real value when I'm looking for pitchers and ADP. Joe, 3 words for Clarke Schmidt in 2025.
I put secure rotation spot, and it might feel like it's not a secure rotation spot, but considering the other personnel here, Garrett Cole, aging with elbow problems. Max Fried, consecutive years of forearm problems. Carlos Rodon always seems to find his way onto the IL at some point, even for just a couple games or something. Luis Heel, who had Tommy John surgery, just started to get worked out last season. And then Marcus Stroman, who's already unfollowed the Yankees on all social media. I saw somebody post that the other day. So he's already in mid-season form. So I don't think the relationship is great there. Who knows with Stroman? But he's also not a great pitcher. There's also that. They're giving him a boatload of money, but he's not great. Clarke Schmidt, true talent-wise, is probably the number 4 guy here. Cole, Fried, Rodon, and then probably Clarke Schmidt. He was excellent last year, and I think a lot of it gets kind of lost because he did miss a good chunk of the season. He was hurt for a lot of it, but he finished the year on the mound. It's very important to finish the year healthy for me. If you're getting hurt at the last few weeks of September and ending injured, you never really know what to expect, but he finished the year healthy. I think he is going to, at the very least, start somewhere in the 25-game vicinity, and that price is just too low at this point. Clarke Schmidt is an afterthought in a lot of rooms, especially shallower drafts. He's probably your last 2 picks of the draft type of range. I'd be doing it every single time.
Yeah, me too. I love the profile I wrote up in the Black Book. Go check that out too. That's out there on Amazon right now. And Bowden Francis, the last guy on our list, Toronto Blue Jays, and it's kind of cruel. I wouldn't let Joe Orrico do this one. This is for the Welsh here, I believe, right? We're going to let Welsh do this one. So 3 words for a guy last year who, certainly had some moments in 2024. A 3.30 ERA combined over 27 games. 13 of them were starts. So what are your expectations for him in 3 words or less, Welsh?
Run it back. Run it back. Bowden Francis second half is, obviously like the reason that everybody is locked in. I wouldn't say you look at his arsenal and you go like, wow, this is going to be the next Spencer Strider or anything like that. Fastball's averaging just under 93 miles per hour. Throws a 73 mile an hour curveball. But one of his big changes and was probably the catalyst here was he was essentially not throwing a split finger the year before. He threw it almost 20% of the time. It was the second highest thrown pitch he had across the board. And the thing that makes this so interesting is that second half that he had. He blew up in the first half. He had like an over 5 ERA, but he had a 1.80 ERA in the second half. He did not walk anybody. He was getting strikeouts. That split finger was really dominant. And what I would throw out as potential mix to look is his curveball really wasn't great. It had a really low whiff and strikeout percentage. His slider and his split finger, I'm rounding up just a tiny bit, both 30% K percentage or higher pitches. Maybe you see more slider in there. He can go deeper into games. If he's got 2 big, crazy whiff pitches with that fastball and he is throwing strikes, Bowden Francis might not, he might not just be this afterthought at the end of your rotation. He might be a catalyst to like a 3-4 SP. So Bowden Francis, let's run it back.
All right, we're going to run it back. Those are 20 sleepers in 3 words or less. You can define us in 3 words and less if you like in the comments below. Maybe be careful, everybody. But seriously, let us know if you're in on some of these names, which one's your favorite one on this list of 20. We'd love to hear from you on the YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe to Fantasy Pros MLB, the place to be for all things fantasy baseball. And of course, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts as well. That'll do it for us. But the story of the game goes on for the Welsh and Joe Orrico. I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.